Welcome to The Art of Likeability, ranked one of the top podcasts in the world. In this podcast, you'll discover how to leverage likability to build stronger relationships, lead more efficiently, close more sales, and keep customers happy while increasing success in your professional and personal life. Let's jump in with your host, Arel Moody.
What's going on, Likeability family? Arel Moody here, your host of the Art of Likeability podcast, where you learn all the incredible things that you need to increase your relationships, increase the success in your life. And you know what? We help you learn things you didn't even know you needed. This is like the iPod, iPhone of podcasts. You'd be like, man, I didn't even know I needed an iPod. And then when it comes out, it's like, how did I live without it? That's the kind of information that you're going to be getting today. You're welcome in advance because we have an amazing special guest. His name is Bob Stromberg. So let me tell you about Bob. So Bob has a really unique blend of what he calls original story, stand-up, and shtick. He's been taking this and speaking to Fortune 500 companies, helping nonprofits raise multi-millions of dollars with it. And he's garnered a lot of literary and theater awards and broken box office records. Now, what's cool about this is that the London Times says this guy's a genuinely funny man, and the Chicago Sun-Times said he has a mesmerizing physical comedic style. So what's great is that he's been working for over 40 years and been successful in a field that a lot of people are what we call struggling artists, but he's figured out how to do it successfully by mastering the craft of creativity. So we're going to be going into how he talks about how to master the craft, some incredible things about his power of story illustrations, and just great. I'm just so excited about this. When I saw this, I was like, this is the guy we need to hear from. So Bob, thank you so much for taking some time to be with the Art of Likeability family.
No, thank you, Arel. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for that great setup, by the way. I've been excited about being on your podcast because when I heard about this podcast about likability, I thought I want to be on there because here's the truth. I think most likable people are creative people. And the reason they're likable is because creative people, they're joyful. They're excited about living every day because they're fulfilling an innate desire that they have, that all of us have, to create. And that desire and that ability to create, it's woven into our very genes. And when we recognize that and we use our creativity, then we experience fulfillment. When we don't, there's always an empty place. There's always something missing in our lives. And frankly, when there's something, when people walk around with an empty place in their life, something missing in their lives, they do tend, don't you think, to be a little less likable?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that's great about creativity and just the creative process is that the more you tap into it, the more interesting you are, the more interested you are about life, the more things you have to talk about, the more things people are like, why, how are you always doing all those things? And I absolutely share that with you. And I'm curious for you, did you, just very quickly on the background, were you someone who, since you were in kindergarten, you were doing creative projects? Was there an exploration phase? What was kind of your journey into this whole creative process?
Yeah, very briefly, when I was 8 years old, I sat in a music class. By the way, I was a funny kid. I could make people laugh from the time my first memories are making my parents laugh. And I loved that. And I can make them laugh. That just tickled me. I could make my classmates laugh. I knew that from kindergarten on. I would have been, in fact, my greatest aspiration was to become the class clown. Unfortunately, my dad was the principal in the school. So that was an impossibility for me. I could not be the class clown as a result of that. But I remember as an 8-year-old sitting in third grade, and Miss Nagel, our music teacher, came in. She was a really large woman, and she came in and she sat down at the piano bench, which was always funny for us because we're looking at the back end of Miss Nagel sitting on this tiny stool. And she began pounding out the chords to this new song, and it was on page 14. I'm 64 years old, Arel, and I can remember the picture at the top of that page, little Amish guy walking through a late summer meadow, storm clouds in the background, little blue river in the front. And we began singing this song, Shenandoah. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to see you gone away, you rolling river. Now listen, these are 33 third graders singing this song, and it could not have sounded good. But I'm sitting there, and I burst into tears. And I didn't know why I burst into tears. There was just something about that melody, those words, which I don't know what those words could have meant to a third grader, but they moved me so deeply, I burst into tears. That was my first exposure of being overwhelmed to the beauty of art. And from that moment on, from third grade on, it was like, I want to recreate that myself. And that led to lots and lots of songwriting, hundreds of songs that I wrote. It led to telling stories between those songs when I was performing. Then I recognized that people were laughing more at the songs than at the stories than they were enjoying the songs. And I began doing stand-up comedy, and that led to writing plays, and that led to big productions around the world. And it was it's been a pretty remarkable thing. But the most remarkable thing for me to think about is that I've been able to do it for 40 years. I started doing it professionally, meaning I finished college, I majored in art there, and then I started right into, could I be a performer? Could I be a writer? Is it possible for me to make a living this way? And I've never had a job. I've been doing this now for 42 years, which puts me in a pretty elite group of artists who have actually been able to pull that off. And you probably didn't even know my name, Arel, before we set up this interview, and yet I've been doing it all of these years. So that got me thinking, how is this possible? How have I been able to pull that off? And that led me to some pretty great discoveries about creativity that are things that I can share with the world and with your Likeability family.
Yeah, and I think it's really great to kind of emphasize that in an area that a lot of people might find struggle, or even what they may think is their original passion, because you start out saying, no, I want to be a songwriter. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm sure you still love it and you still do it. But you were aware enough to realize that, hey, there's this other thing that seems to be catching really well. It's those stories in between the songs. So I just love the idea that sometimes where we start, just by starting, it moves us closer to a goal that we may not have known existed. So I really appreciate that you were aware enough to even acknowledge that.
Yeah, it's what artists call reinventing themselves. And that's happened a half a dozen times for me throughout my career, or to me, or I've done that a half a dozen times throughout my career. And that's where you realize, oh, this is an area I could maybe expand that area of what I do a bit more. And really what you're doing is you're filling the pipeline because you never know what's going to catch. You never know what's going to hit. You never know if maybe I will write this story out. Maybe I'll write it out. Maybe I'll send it in because something might happen with it.
Now, you talk about story, and I think that anyone who can master the art of storytelling, no matter how many times you reinvent yourself, right? Whether it's one, like you say, okay, I'm an engineer, now I'm going to be a cupcake maker, or whatever it is, right? Like we all have our individual stories, and I encourage everyone listening to be aware of when you need to reinvent yourself, because at different seasons in our life, that moment kind of pulls you into it. The good thing is, regardless of what season you're in, regardless of how you're currently identifying yourself or re-identifying yourself, creating a powerful story, being able to explain that story, captivate people, use language that can pull people in to want to buy, in this imaginary situation, your cupcakes because you used to be an engineer, or whatever it is that I said, is really powerful. Yeah. And you have come up with something you call powerful story illustrations. Kind of give us the overview of what that is and how you see story connecting into the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I was invited about 10 years ago, so about 30 years into my career, I was invited to come to a thing called the Dynamic Communicators Workshop down in, I guess we were meeting in Nashville or somewhere in Tennessee that year. And I was invited to come in to speak on the power of story, as you're asking me to do now. And I found myself going, boy, I've got to figure out what I've been doing all these years, because so much of what I just did intuitively. And I think a lot of artists do that. They just do, they sort of intuitively develop what they do and they realize, oh, I'm good at this. And they keep doing it. And it seems to come pretty quickly. And I've been doing this for years. It's interesting. Arel, recently I heard that Sting, the singer Sting, who I'm a great fan of, he had a dry spell for 8 years. Here's a guy who's won multiple Grammy Awards and performed all around the world, and one of the most famous singers-songwriters living today. And he had a dry spell where he couldn't write a song for 8 years. And people might go, well, how is that even possible? I mean, I find that myself thinking that. How is it possible that somebody with that talent can't come up with a song in 8 years? He just went dry. And the problem was he wasn't filling the reservoir that he has. He wasn't filling that pipeline. And so much of that is finding your own story. And it's interesting to note that Sting did start writing again. In fact, recently, a year ago, he had a Broadway show that he had written. I saw it in Chicago, then it went to Broadway, and I think now it's in the West End of London. He wrote a Broadway show. And where did he find the material for that? He went back. That Broadway show came right off the end of that 8-year dry spell. He went back to his childhood, and he began remembering. He began mining, M-I-N-I-G, mining. He began mining his memory, all of those remembrances that he had, all those memories that he had, to find things that moved him. And he found stuff there. It's the first time ever that he'd written in the dialect that he grew up with in that shipbuilding town in the UK where he grew up. That's where he found that's where he found his voice again. And a lot of that's true with story. I am not a teacher of writing. I always tell people, I can't tell you how to be a good writer, but I can tell you what you should be writing. And a lot of that is going back and finding the stuff that made you who you are. I've been watching a show on TV, and I'm late to this game. This is a pretty popular show, I guess, but I've been watching it on Netflix called Chef's Table. And it's the story of the 50 greatest chefs in the world. And there's this thing called the Michelin star. And I guess if you get 5 of those, you're the top chef in the world. But it tells the story of each of these chefs. And most all of them, at one point in their careers, usually early in their career, they go to France and they learn under the tutelage of these great French masters of high French cuisine. And they learn how to make this food really, really well. And then the story tells about how they get their own restaurants and they start making this French food. And they find themselves, all of them, they find themselves dissatisfied and unhappy and bored because now they have this incredible skill. They're able to make this great food, but it's not creative. They're just doing it over and over and over again. And there's nothing personal about it for them to make this great French food. They're making somebody else's food, in other words. But to a person, and this is what the point of the show I just love, where it turns, and these people now with all this great skill they learned in France, they go back to their hometowns often. Or if they don't go back to their hometowns, they go back in their memory to the hometowns and they remember what it is they enjoyed eating as a child, the kinds of foods they enjoyed eating, the flavors, the aromas, the colors. They go back there and they start drawing from their memories. They get their story of food back there and they bring it into the modern day and they begin creating these beautiful works of art, which is what they are. It's interesting. Paintings, that's a visual medium. Music, that's an audio medium. Food, you use it's visual, it's taste, it's the tactile sense what you feel in your mouth. It's even auditory, the sounds of sizzling food, pouring wines, the sound of food even in your chewing in your mouth, all these senses together. And it's a wonderful show, by the way. But what's beautiful about it is that these people go back, they find their story, the story they should be telling. They find it back there in their memories as a childhood. And that's what I've done my whole life. I always wanted to create my own material. And it wasn't a haughty thing. It wasn't a prideful thing. It was just that's what I got. the biggest kick out of writing songs, writing plays, writing stories about me. I didn't want to do somebody else's stuff. And frankly,
there was
go ahead.
No, there was something you said, and I thought it was really great. And I want to get to it because it was really powerful. About one, there's two quick things. The first one is, I once heard that the challenge always has to exceed the skill set. That's what makes life interesting. Because once you get really good at something, like if I said you're a professional shoe tire, it would be a really boring job, right? So the challenge has to exceed the skill set. And you mentioned with Sting that when he went back into creating, like you said, in his own dialect, is that it?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what he did was he kind of went back into his past, and these chefs went back into their past about their childhood, and they pulled out kind of this new meaning and this new essence in their adult life. And what I'd love to, get some clarity on from your perspective is so many times we kind of we think, well, I've not done anything, or my stuff's not interesting, or, that's easy for you, Bob, because look how cool you travel around the world and you do all these things. Of course, you've got a treasure trove of stories you can pull from, but me, I'm just a boring guy or gal. How does someone actually, because I don't think that's true for anyone, but how does someone kind of figure out or can create that own going into one's childhood as a chef or going into one's own dialect as a musician within their own life?
Well, that's a great question and a really important question to answer in terms of creativity. First of all, let me say in terms of people saying, "Oh, it'd be easy for you," and I do hear that, especially at this. I feel like I'm in my 60s now. I finally feel like I've gotten really good at what I do. It's taken this long, which should be encouraging to anybody coming who is younger than me. But people say to me often, I've never been creative. My brother is creative. My sister's creative, but I'm the one that I just never. And I've always wanted to try this, but it's probably too late. Well, it's never too late. It is never, ever too late to try anything new. And you may not be creative right now. You may not be, but you used to be. When you were a child, that there was a time when you laid on your back as an infant and you flipped over on your stomach, and man, that was exciting to you. You discovered, I've got this body and it can do things. And all of us have seen kids up on their knees, or little babies up on their knees, rocking back and forth. They can't even crawl yet, but that smile comes on their face. Look what I'm doing, and that's when it begins. And it doesn't end really until about middle school. And at middle school, things start. This creativity starts to become educated out of us. And I have a theory about that. By the way, this for the first 10 years of our life or so, this creativity that we're experiencing is called play. Play. It's play. Every bit of our play is creative. That's what we're doing. And it's so exciting and so fun. And that's the same feeling that we feel later in life when we begin to re-experience creativity. It feels like play to us. It's so much fun. We get to be about 10 years old. We're in school. And we've discovered by this point, 4th or 5th grade, that we have to take these tests every week or twice a week or 3 times a week or once every 6, whatever it is. We have to take these tests. And the tests require that we answer a question with a word or a number that we've figured out at the bottom of a problem. And there's only one correct answer. There's only one correct number that you have to write at the bottom of that problem. Only one correct word you have to write or you have to circle in that multiple choice test. There's only one answer. And creativity doesn't work that way. In creativity, there are many, many answers. There are many, many possibilities. And it's a matter of just finding out what the best one is. Now, people say go ahead.
How do we, if I'm an adult and I go, all right, I was a creative kid and, I used to come up with all these, creative things, but I, hit puberty, I matured, I got schooled, tested it out of me. What are some ways we can, rekindle that or go back into that play mode as an adult to become more creative in the adult work we do?
Okay, let me give this to you. And this is real specific to the question you just answered. Here's how you do it. Here's how you kindle and you nurture creativity in yourself. I have it in an acronym that I say is GIT, G-I-T. I say, this is how you can get your Master's of Creativity degree. You can imagine me saying that with large buck teeth. Here's how you get it. G, you grab. G stands for grab. You grab anything that grabs you emotionally. So if you go back in your memory and you begin to think about things that happened as a kid, memories will come into your mind and they'll grab you emotionally. I'm not saying you'll burst into tears or you'll burst out laughing, but you'll feel emotionally that, oh, that makes me happy, or that makes me sad. You grab it, you write it down. This doesn't have to be a memory, by the way. It can be something that happens when you go to the market today. You're standing at the checkout line, you see somebody, and something happens and it moves you in some way. You write it down. You grab it. That's what grab means, to you write it down. If you don't write it down or speak it into your phone, which is what most of us do these days, have a file and you speak it into your phone so it's there. You can't lose it. It can't get away. Because as you know, if you don't write it down, it'll be gone before the end of the day. You may never in your life think about that moment again. But if you grab it, you've got it. So you begin grabbing and you get a list of things. If you do this for a week, you may end up with 20 things on your list that you have grabbed. Every one of those memories, those impressions, those experiences have grabbed you in some way emotionally. You've grabbed them back. You've got them. Then you have to interrogate them. Every day you come back to them. This is the process of creativity. And I'll tell you, Arel, I wish I'd known this. I wish I'd known this for the first 30 years and not the last 10 years, because the last 10 years have been 5 times as productive as the first 30, because I realized that this is the creative process. And I don't care if you're Sting or anybody else, everybody goes through this process, but they may be doing it intuitively. But if they're being creative, this is the process that's happening.
Now,
Number one.
Before we move on to the I, because the grab one is very intriguing, because so recently in my life, I actually lost a friend of mine young guy, 34 years old, went to sleep, passed away, didn't wake up. And it was a really an emotional turmoil for me. And I have a other good friend of mine who's a podcaster who said, Arel, you should record what you're feeling right now. He was like, sometimes you use it, sometimes you don't. But, if you want to talk to me, we can do an interview and just record your feelings. And I remember my first initial reaction to him saying that was like, man, I don't want to remember this. I don't want to I want to get past this. And in the moment when it was real and I did have tears streaming, I felt this huge natural resistance to wanting to, stay in that place. Or if I get really excited, let's go on the opposite spectrum, I might notice myself saying, I want to be present. I want to just be in it. But now that I'm on the other side, I realize it would be important, because if somebody else is going through a tough time, they'd want to hear that natural, raw emotion. So if someone feels a resistance to grabbing, whether it's a deeply personal emotional, or maybe it's a sad emotion, or maybe it's a really exuberant one that they feel they want to keep to their chest, how does someone open up or not let that kind of, I want to keep this to myself or I want to forget it, stand in the way of grabbing these emotional experiences and memories?
Yeah, this comes up a lot in my course, Mastering the Craft of Creativity. A lot of my students say to me when I talk to them about grabbing, they'll say, I don't really want to grab that. And in this case, lots of times they're thinking back on their memories, and in some cases it's some pretty terrible stuff that they went through, some abuse kind of stuff, perhaps as children. You don't want to grab that. And I tell them, the good news is you don't have to grab that. You don't have to. You and I, Arel, we actually have control of our thoughts. And there's a misconception in our world that our thoughts kind of control us, that we can't control what goes on in our brains. That's not true. We can focus on whatever we want to focus on. And there are times when you shouldn't be talking about some painful thing that happened in your life. When you're grieving for your friend, right after the funeral or before the funeral, maybe that's not the time to get on your podcast and tell people exactly what you're feeling right now, because you don't understand a lot of what you're feeling. And it's sort of like, a good blog, for example, is not the same thing as a good diary where you're just spilling, or you're just spilling your guts there. It's the next step of interrogating where you can start to go, okay, this is what I felt back then. And you begin to interrogate and say, what did that mean? What was I really feeling? Was I grieving for my friend, or was I grieving for me? Was I focused where I should have been focused? And you begin to interrogate that what you've grabbed. That's when you can start to put some meaning into it. And it's after the interrogation process. That's the time you should probably be on with your podcasting friend and sharing that with the world, because that's going to be some valuable stuff for us to see. When you're right in the midst of it, often it might not be such a good time.
Got it. So yeah. Are you suggesting when we're doing this grab, is it happening in the moment? So I'm walking down the street and a thought hits me. I stop and do it. Do I sit down at like a table at night and turn off my media and do it? Are there any strategies when we're looking to grab and then interrogate, just in terms of setup, that work particularly well?
Yes, I think the way to do it is to grab immediately. And I do it with my phone. I have a notes file in my iPhone. I hit notes. There's one called Grab. It's right there. I hit it, and I go. Just saw that guy drop his shopping bag, and I watch those kids walk by him and not help. Boom. That's it. Now listen. I'm not grabbing a story illustration. It's not a story illustration yet. It's not a book. It's not a song. In other words, it's not an idea yet. It's just, I saw something. It moved me. It made me feel angry. It made me feel sad for this person, angry at the kids, whatever it is, whatever this experience was. But it's not an idea yet. It's just an emotion that hit me. And so I grabbed it. And all I put in my phone is, guy dropped the shopping bag, kids walk by. That's enough for me to remember. I grab it. I let it go. But I've got it. It's not going to get away. Then later I come back to it. And I'll go back to my list 2 or 3 times a week, maybe. I go back to my list and I peruse it. I just kind of go down through the list, and a couple of those will jump out at me. And that one, guy with the shopping bag, that keeps jumping out to me. And then I begin to interrogate it. And I say, why do you keep moving me? What is it about you that does this to me inside? How could I use you? Are you a story illustration? Are you, and if so, what might I be illustrating by telling the story of what I saw there? Are you a character in a book? Are you a song? What are you? Something I put in my play? What are you? And that has to do with whatever your medium is. Do I paint this scene? If I'm a painter, are you a painting? Are you in there? And through the miracle of the way our brains work, they start going on that. As you keep coming back to it every day, it starts going, and all of a sudden you go, aha! And that's, this feeling, Arel. That feeling of, oh man, I could do something with that. That aha moment for every creative, that's the most exciting moment. That's the coveted moment for every creative person. The aha moment is the moment that what you've grabbed, the thoughts, the memories, the impressions, those thoughts become an idea. So you've grabbed, you've interrogated, and thoughts that you grabbed through the interrogation process, they become ideas, and you go, aha, I know what I can do with this now.
And when you're doing that interrogation phase, and I like that because you gave some really great tips on how to go through the interrogation phase. How do I use this? Why is this coming up for me? Are there any specific go-to questions that you like to ask that really help you get to that aha experience?
Well, those are the ones. And I know those seem like they're not very specific. Really what it is, what you'll find yourself doing, and students have this is the hardest process. Well, I shouldn't say that. The whole process at the beginning is difficult because, first of all, people, you're grabbing things and you go, this is nothing. What is this? Yeah, so it moved me. I have no idea what this means. And I say, grab it anyway. Grab it. Just grab it. All right, I'll grab it. I don't know what it means, but I'll grab it. But there's nothing very exciting about that. And then you're interrogating it, and you don't know what to ask it because you don't know what this thing is yet. It's like when somebody's been arrested and they're sitting in a chair with a light bulb above them, and the officers are beginning the interrogation. They don't even know who this guy is. So what do you ask? And it's just so the process is basically saying, why are you even on this list? What are you doing here? Why did you move me? Do you go deeper into me than, is it more than, is what I felt in experiencing that when I saw that, is that just what happened there with that guy by the shopping cart? Or is this something about me? And you just start, so I guess the answer is no, Arel. Sometimes I ask one question, other times I ask others. I'm just perusing, I'm just looking. Is there anything here? Is there anything in this list do any of you on this list have anything to say to me? I know that sounds crazy, but at some point, if you keep going through that list and looking at those things and letting them touch you again, at some point, one of them is going to jump out and say, hey, I got something for you.
Yeah, and that visual is very strong, because if you actually almost imagine in your head, you take this idea, this experience that for some reason, because you seeing someone drop their bags and kids walk by might bring something up in you, but it may not bring anything up in me or someone else. So if it brings up in you, you're now taking that grab, that experience, that feeling, and you're, metaphorically putting it into an interrogation chair. And I love that visual of the detective room with the single light bulb, and it's flashing, and it's like, all right, what do you have to say? What do you mean? Is this something in me? Is this something in people? Is this something that reminds me? So asking every question as if you were interrogating, as you were the detective of it, I think is a really strong visual to almost open up that creativity in oneself.
Yeah. And you don't know what it means. And sometimes the interrogation, honestly, here's the truth. Sometimes the interrogation will take 10 minutes. Boom, you got the truth. It's like, oh my, I can use that tonight. I can write that out. I can use that in my show tonight. I mean, that it can be that fast. Or I can write that song. I'm going to sing that song tonight. That happens with songwriters sometimes. You hear them say, haven't you heard many times where a songwriter will say, I'm going to sing you a song now. I wrote this song. It took me about 5 minutes to write this song. I'd like to sing it for you now. What, you wrote that song in 5 minutes? Yes, sometimes it's that fast. You grab, you interrogate, you transform. The whole thing takes 5-10 minutes. It's done. Now, of course, if it's a Broadway musical, it's never going to happen that way. It's going to take years. But sometimes the interrogation process can happen, that grabbing and interrogating can happen in 5 minutes. Sometimes it can take 20 years. I have several times had things on my list for 20 years. They're written down there. I don't know what they mean. They're still there. I peruse them. They've been there for year after year after year. And sometimes I take things off my list. I go, you know what? This list is getting so long, and there's nothing here, nothing here, nothing here. But I'll keep something on there that's been there for years. I just leave it there, and there it is. I go, aha. And often it's just at the moment when I need it. I say this, by the way, too. This is a great thing for preachers. Preachers are that's an interesting profession, because they have to do this every week. And they have to do it for the same people every week. Now, you're a public speaker, Arel, so you can go out and you can speak to a crowd, and you can use story illustrations that you used 100 times, 200 times. You can use them again because you're with a new crowd almost every time you're public speaking. Not a preacher. He's with the same people, or she is with the same people every week. And so you need to come up with new story illustrations all the time. And I always tell people that very often, if they've got this list that they're interrogating, and they've got a text of scripture that they're preaching from, say, and they're going, I need an illustration for this, keep perusing that list a couple times a week. And at just the right moment, and I've had people tell me this happens over and over to them, they say, at the very moment I needed it, Thursday night, when I thought, man, I'm heading towards Sunday and I've got nothing. On Thursday night, they've got the illustration they need, which of course that's a terribly, terribly exciting moment.
Now, just for clarity, when you use the term story illustration, define that in case anyone's saying, well, is he talking about drawings? Is this more of a conceptual thing? Just for clarity.
Yeah, actually, I'm speaking about storytelling when I say an illustration. So you tell a story to illustrate a truth, a greater truth that you're trying to explain in a talk. So if you're a public speaker and you're speaking about grief, like you've been through recently around, and you're speaking about grief and you're telling your own story, but you want to explain in a deeper way what you have experienced, you might tell a story of somebody else that you learn from. So you tell this story to illustrate a particular point. So yeah, I'm using it not as a picture, although frankly, this process, this creative process, it doesn't matter what your medium is. It doesn't matter if it's painting or sculpture or cooking or songwriting or playwriting. It's the same process. I saw one of these chef tables the other night where, again, guy goes to France, he comes back, starts his own restaurant in Australia. It's successful. He is bored to death. He's working like crazy and bored to death. And he goes, I don't want to, it's not worth it. It's not worth spending my life this way. I want to make my food for people. Goes in his mind, he goes back in his memory to his boyhood. He remembers almost drowning on the coast of Australia. He got caught in a riptide, caught in the waves. It pushed him against the coral. He couldn't get up. His father came out and saved him, but he actually went unconscious. And he remembered to this day, he said, this isn't a pleasant memory, but he said, I remember, I know the ocean in a way that nobody knows the ocean. And I have from the time I was a boy, because he said, I've had the ocean way up in my sinuses. I've had the ocean in my gut and in my lungs. And I know the smell of that. I know the taste of that. And this sounds crazy, but he said, I want to create a food that people will smell and eat, and it will give them a sense of what I experienced that day, not in almost dying, but in taking in the ocean so fully. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but he then began creating this kind of seafood that people from all around the world come to eat because it's like nothing they've ever seen or tasted before. All from the process of going back, this is an emotional experience I grabbed from my boyhood, I interrogate it, and I go, aha, there it is. I'm going to make food out of this memory. And then the T is for transform. So you grab, you interrogate, and you transform. And that transformation process is the process of taking that idea that you now have and transforming it into something that you can share with the world. So that becomes the speech that you give, that becomes the painting that you paint, it becomes the blog that you write today. It becomes the podcast that you're making. It becomes the invention that you've been working on for years. Anything, it becomes the result of your creativity.
So, if you could walk us through a personal example of this, whether it's the kids with the shopping bag, or maybe it's another one that you grabbed, you interrogated, and then you personally transformed. I think it would be really awesome to see it come to life.
I sure can. I wrote a play with a couple of buddies of mine, a comedy called Triple Espresso, a highly caffeinated comedy. We wrote this in 95, and it took off around the world. The reason that many of your listeners may not have heard it is it's one of the few plays that have taken off around the world that hasn't actually been to Broadway. Most of the plays that have taken off around the world at least have a short Broadway or off-Broadway one, and then they go around the world. We didn't do that. We deliberately said, you know what, this is going so well, we don't need to spend all the money in New York to do this. So we had the opportunity, one of the highlights of that whole experience, which was about a 20-year experience, we had the opportunity to be in Dublin, Ireland for a couple years. And I would walk back from the theater every night, the Andrews Lane Theater in Dublin. I walked a couple miles to my apartment where I was living. And I walked by an art store every night. And in the art store, in the darkness where I was, there's this brightly lit, beautiful window display. And the main thing in the display was a large beautiful wooden box filled with pastel, what we normally think of, they look like crayons. They're not actually crayons, they're or chalk sticks, but they look like chalk sticks. But there were probably 200 colors, gradated colors in this box, all lined up. They were just beautiful. And every night I would stop and I would look at that box full of pastels, paints. And I began to get, they grabbed me. I would stand there and just look at the colors every night. And I realized I want to try that. I want to do, it was grabbing me. So I went back and I bought a small case. That would have cost me $1,000 to buy that big case. But I bought a small case of paints and some pastel paper. And I began working on this. And that led me into about a 5-year period of painting with pastels. But I still held on to that idea. I'd written down pastel paints in the art store window. What is it about that? What was it about that every night that grabbed me? Why did those colors grab me? I didn't know, but I kept coming back to it and interrogating it. Then, when I was working on my class, Mastering the Craft of Creativity, I was trying to explain to my students in the writing process now, when I'm writing the course, I want to explain to students that this process of grabbing and interrogating and transforming, it actually changes your brain. It changes the way you see the world. And when I say it changes your brain, I don't mean it changes your mind. I mean it changes your brain. And neuroscience has proven this to be true, by the way. Neuroscience has now discovered that it takes 21 days to form a habit. You've probably heard that your whole life. Actually, that's not a strong habit, but if you repeat this habit for a couple cycles, so you're up to 2 or 3 months, it is permanent. It's there for a lifetime. And so I was trying to think, how can I explain to them, to my students, that if they practice this process, they'll see the world differently. And I remember this art store window kept coming back to me. And I realized that when I started painting, within 2 or 3 months, I was seeing the world differently. Completely, I mean, literally seeing with my eyes. I saw the world differently. I noticed, Darrell, that shadows on the street or on the grass, they are very rarely gray. Wouldn't you think a shadow it's some shade of gray? No, sometimes, but lots of times they are bright blue. I mean, real blue. Sometimes they're purple, depending upon the light and where the sun is in the sky, the color, how the clouds are. I discovered that clouds are very seldom just white. I discovered, and this is an interesting one, chrome. When you think of chrome, what color do you think chrome is? Yeah, it's not silver at all. Next time you're out on the street, take a look at a chrome bumper. There's no silver in it at all. What you're seeing is all the colors reflected around it. So if there's a red around it, there's red on the bumper. If there's a blue sky, there's blue on the bumper. There's no silver. It's all reflected color that's coming back to you. Our minds perceive it as silver until you become a painter. And when you become a painter, you realize I can paint it takes silver paint. It looks nothing like chrome. But if I put these combination of colors, all of a sudden, this paint looks like chrome on that canvas. So I began to see the world differently. I wanted to explain to my students that grabbing, interrogating, and transforming will change your brain. It will form a habit in 2 or 3 months. If you go through this process of grabbing and interrogating and transforming, and actually, Errol, it takes 5 to 16 minutes a day. This is what neuroscientists have proven now. 5 to 16 minutes a day of working on grabbing and interrogating and transforming. In 21 days, you'll form a habit, and it will change the way you see the world. All of a sudden, you will wake up. Like I woke up to the colors that I was seeing, this grabbing and interrogating and transforming, you will wake up to your emotional life. You know, when your friend died recently, you experienced a great deal of emotion. Well, there's emotion. You have emotional thoughts coming to you all the time that you're not even aware of. You don't even think of them because you're so busy. We are so busy with our lives. We're not even awake to them. When you begin grabbing and interrogating and transforming every day, looking for things to grab, what's grabbing me? looking for, and begin that interrogating and that transformation process, you wake up emotionally and you begin to feel things the way you never felt them before. It changes your brain because you've developed a new neural pathway that 3 months ago was not in your brain.
And what I really like about that as well is a lot of times folks may struggle with, well, what makes me uniquely me, or what makes me stand out, or what's my kind of unique gift? And I think what you're really also giving in this framework, the G.I.T. framework of grabbing, interrogating, and transforming, is whatever grabs us, that's unique to us. There's something right there. That interrogation is going to lead to an aha that really might be a very specific, individualized view. And then how we can transform it is going to be totally different, whether it's pastel paint, in this particular case, or something else. And I love what you're saying, because if we really spend some time on this, it becomes a habit. Our brain can start picking up and seeing things. I recently did a one of those painting with a twist class where they teach you how to paint, and I've never painted anything ever. And I painted like a really cool thing, but I saw how they did it, and now it opened up like, oh, I think I could not be great at it, but I can be okay at it. And if I practice, maybe I could be good. So the practice portion of it, I think, is fundamental, like getting this into the habit. What happens a lot of time is we break the habit. We go, oh, this was really great, Bob, and I'm like, I'm starting to grab things, and then life gets in the way. Are there any things that you've done with your students to really make sure that outside of just relying on willpower, they create this as a habit that sticks with them?
Well, that's the struggle of the class. I've noticed that those who embrace the class and say, yes, I'm going to actually work on this, they are successful. It does become a habit for them, and it has to become a habit. Otherwise, it's too stinking hard. It's interesting that people can get a book. They say, I want to get this book because I want to. Somebody told me this will be so helpful to me. So they buy the book. Or I want to buy this course online because I've heard it can be so helpful to me. So they buy a course online, and then they don't read it, or they don't do it. And I see that over and over again. I'm not just talking about my course. I'm just talking about the stuff in general. Yeah, I have that book. I'm gonna read that someday. Yeah, I'm gonna do that someday. But they don't do it. And here's the truth: you need to embrace life or not. You need to get on with your creative life or not. And if you decide not, then you're never going to experience that fulfillment that I'm talking about here today. It's not going to happen to you unless you begin the process. That creative stuff is in us. It's not easy for anybody to experience that joy and that fulfillment and that excitement about living creatively. That's not easy for anybody until it becomes a habit. But when it becomes a habit, it's so exciting you can hardly sit still. Again, getting back to Sting, he went through 8 years. This multi-talented guy went through 8 years. He couldn't do what he did. He couldn't write a song. And I contend, and now that I've spoken about this whole process, you'll understand this more. I contend that he stopped doing what he had been doing intuitively. He stopped grabbing. He stopped interrogating. And so if you're not grabbing and interrogating, you've got nothing to transform. And you're not going to get where you need to be. You're not going to be able to do it anymore. I always tell people that we have within us what I describe as a creative reservoir. And as we grab and we interrogate, as we're doing that, we're filling that reservoir, that list of 20 things, and now it's 40 things, and now it's 60. Well, I'm going to get rid of 10 of them. Now it's back to 50. As we grab those things, we're filling the reservoir so that we never get to the place where we go, I can't write anymore. I'm dry. I have nothing to write about, because that list is always there shouting out to you, how about me? How about me? No, you can write about me. Oh, I've got something for you. I've got something really important for you here, Arel. Grab me, interrogate me. That list is always there. It's like a reservoir just begging to be paid attention to. And that's when creativity gets fun and exciting. And then you've got to have a medium. So you have to have a way to you have to be able to transform it into something. That's important. So if you are a blogger, if any of your likability family, if you have I know you've got some bloggers out there. If they're blogging and they're empty, they have nothing to write about. They need to begin this process, and then this process is going to lead to them writing lots of blogs. If you're a songwriter, you're going to end up writing lots more songs. If you're a chef, you're going to end up making much more interesting food that came from way back there. You never even thought about making that food before, but I'm going to try that. I'm going to experiment with that. And that's when creativity really becomes exciting. But you have to actually do it. You can't just think about doing it. And buying a course or buying a book is not doing it. Then you need to actually take the next step and carry through.
You know, you mentioned to me earlier before we got on this call that you really wanted to make sure that people took action, that you really wanted to kind of give a gift of git, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I'd love for you to tell, the special thing that you put together for our listeners. Tell them a little about the Mastering the Craft of Creativity as well. You put together some cool stuff, man, so I really appreciate it. So I'd love for folks to know how to get it.
Well, one of the cool things I have for your likability family is I put together a special page just for you guys. My course is only available a couple times a year. And of course, I know that these podcasts get played over and over and they get out there on the internet, and who knows, somebody may be listening to this in 2014. So if that's the case, I want you to know that you can go to my website and your own webpage. So it's bobstromberg.com/likability. bobstromberg.com/likability, and that will take you to your own page. That's a backdoor into my course and my materials. And there you'll find three things. One is a quiz. This quiz, it's a 3-question multiple choice quiz. It will take a listener, it'll take a person 2 minutes to take 1 minute to actually take the test. It's a creativity quiz. And the name of the quiz is, Are You as Creative as Steve Martin? Now, most people would say, well, no, I'm definitely not. You need to take the quiz. It's really fun, and what you learn is true. I also have on that page a 30-minute creativity training video, which goes deeper into the things that we've discussed here today. Very, very practical. And that will lead to my online course called Mastering the Craft of Creativity. That course is it's 15, 16 hours of video teaching, real fun performances, 20 interviews with remarkably creative people from around the world. Maestro of the Hollywood Bowl, one of the country's, also one of the country's top drummers, songwriters, playwrights, directors. 20 creative people who all attest to this G.I.T. process. Many of them didn't know that that's what they were doing. And when I explained to them what I was teaching, their eyes just lit up and said, I would love to come and talk on your course about that. So that course, it drips out. If you had nothing to do but sit and just take the course, it would take you 6 weeks to take it. It takes most people 3-4 months to get through the course. You do it at your own speed. You're surrounded by a community of other people who are taking the course and encouraging you, but you never have to feel like I'm getting behind. It just takes you through the process and helps you to make this creativity a habit in your life. The G.I.T. process, it makes it a habit, so that creativity becomes fun and actually becomes easy and exciting and enjoyable.
Oh, that's awesome. I think that's going to be something that whether you're a blogger, a professional speaker, if you're a chef, a painter, or even a manager or an entrepreneur, really understanding how to grab someone with story. And the stories that emotionally grab you typically are going to be the kinds of stories that will emotionally grab the kinds of people that you want to relate to you.
That's right, Arel. That's right.
That's crucial because so many times we think, oh, I'm not as, great as this person. Well, whoever you think is great, someone else thinks they're not so great. You think that person's great because they resonate with you. I think this G.I.T. formula and what you're doing with your online class and with the quiz and what you're allowing people to get access to is what's going to be their unique way of creating that feeling of resonation? I don't know if that's a word, but creating resonating experiences with others through your unique emotional grabs that you interrogate, figure out why is it emotionally grabbing you in the first place, and then transforming that into something through a various medium that can impact people.
Hey, see, some resonation is happening with you and me right now, Arel. I like that word. That's probably a word. Resonation.
I'm hoping if resonation is not a word, we will all petition Oxford Dictionary and we'll get it a word and we'll be fine.
Absolutely. You bet.
And, Bob, if anybody wanted to stay in touch with you, find out what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, is there any great way for people to just be more connected to everything in the Stromberg universe? Oh,
absolutely. I'm at Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn, both those places, Bob Stromberg. That's StromberG, Bob Stromberg. And also bobstromberg.com. If you connect with me there, you can say, hey, love to be a friend here or there. And I am available to people. That's one of the things that I'm able to really offer. I've noticed when I look for customer support often, it's so difficult because you can never get to the people you want to talk to. With me, if you talk to me on Facebook, you're talking to me or Twitter or LinkedIn or through my website, and I will talk to you. You know what I like to do? I like to make friends, Arel. I want you and I to be buddies. We just met today. I'd like us to in 10 years to say, I'd like to be able to say, yeah, Arel's my friend, and have it be true.
Yeah, I will grab this memory and I will write it down because it's touched me right now. So thank you, Bob.
You bet.
And we're coming down to the last final moments here, and you've given us so much to really ponder on. What are the emotions? What are the memories that when we go back into our childhood or years into the past, what stands out? What grabs us? We have the process of collecting it, putting it down into our phone, as simple as using a notes function on the phone. We then sit there and interrogate, why is this important to me? What sticks out? What is this? And we can either get it quickly, it may take some time, but we kind of fill up our creative reservoir every time we do that. And then we can see, well, how do we transform it? Do I use this as a story in my upcoming meeting? Do I use this as a example in my annual report? Do I use it as a play? Do I use it as a character in a play? Do I use it as a presentation topic? Do I use it? A podcast, a blog, we can go so many different multi-purpose ways. Is there anything else that you can share with us to help kind of put an amazing bow on what already has been an amazing framework of creating really powerful stories?
Yeah. I want the likability family to, if they remember one thing, understand this. Creativity is not a gift that some special people have. Creativity is a craft that all of you can master, and I encourage you to do that.
Well, that's it. And as we say on every single podcast, the information that you just learned here today from Bob specifically, it's going to do absolutely nothing to impact your life. The implementation of this information will absolutely improve, transform, and create a life where you're more creative, you're more passionate, you're more excited about just finding out what is it that your brain's telling you today, what is it that your heart's bringing to your attention, and you'll be able to transform. And I'm very confident there are many of you right now that are going to look back to this interview and you're going to say, hey, I created that new business. I created that new fill in the blank because I had this great framework. So I hope that you stay involved with what Bob's doing. I hope you go to bobstromberg.com/likability, take the quiz, get the content. Friend Bob, you can tell just by his genuine feel that he's a great guy. And ultimately, this is your one life. Make it an awesome life, y'all. Thank you all for listening. Bob, sending you a big old high five. You are awesome.
Thanks, Arel.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast, The Art of Likability, and reach out with any questions you have. Until next time, remember, my friend, you are awesome.